She walked through that door, and everything I thought I knew about myself shattered in an instant. Amber, the girl who had spent 15 years destroying me in every competition, every game, every moment that mattered. I hated her. Or at least, that's what I'd convinced myself of for a decade and a half. But standing there in my family's living room, with snow melting in her dark hair and that familiar smirk playing at the corners of her lips, I realized something terrifying. I had no idea what I actually felt. My heart was racing. My palms were sweating. And it wasn't from anger. This Christmas was supposed to be simple. Instead, it became the most complicated, beautiful, and devastating season of my life. If you want to hear how this story unfolds, how a childhood rivalry transforms into something neither of us saw coming, subscribe to this channel right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and pine when Mom told me. I was chopping vegetables for the Christmas Eve dinner, my hands moving mechanically through the motions I'd performed 100 times before, when she casually dropped the bomb that would unravel everything. "Oh, by the way, honey, the Mitchells are coming tomorrow. Amber's home from college for the holidays. I invited her to join us for Christmas dinner." I froze. The knife hovered mid-air above a carrot, and I'm pretty sure I stopped breathing. My name is Sabrina, and I had spent the last 4 years trying to convince myself that Amber Mitchell meant nothing to me, that our rivalry was ancient history, that I'd moved on. "You did what?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom turned from the stove, her face flushed from the heat, completely oblivious to the earthquake she'd just triggered in my chest. Amber's parents mentioned she'd be alone this year since they're visiting her brother in California. You know how I feel about anyone spending the holidays by themselves. Besides, you two used to be so close before that silly rivalry started. Silly rivalry. That's what she called it. As if the past 15 years of competition, of watching Amber beat me at everything from spelling bees to soccer championships, of feeling that sharp sting of defeat every single time we faced off, was just some cute childhood phase. I set the knife down carefully, my hands trembling slightly. "Mom, that was a long time ago. We're not kids anymore." "Exactly," she said, turning back to her pot of mulled wine. "You're both adults now. Maybe it's time to let that go." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because the truth was far more complicated than she understood. The rivalry with Amber had defined me. It had pushed me to be better, to work harder, to refuse to accept second place. But somewhere along the way, something else had started growing beneath all that competition. Something I'd spent years burying under layers of contempt and dismissal. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind was spinning with memories. Amber's face when she won the state spelling bee in 7th grade, the way she'd looked at me across the soccer field during the championship game, the moment she'd beaten me for valedictorian despite my 3.09 GPA. Every memory was sharp, painful, and somehow precious, in a way I didn't want to admit. The next morning, I woke up at 6. I couldn't sleep. I got out of bed, pulled on a hoodie, and went downstairs to make coffee. The house was still quiet, the pre-dawn darkness pressing against the windows. Outside, fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering everything in a pristine white blanket that made the world look new. I was on my second cup when I heard the car pull into the driveway. My stomach dropped. It was too early. Way too early. I watched through the kitchen window as a silver sedan came to a stop, and then she emerged. Amber Mitchell. Older. Different. The same. She was wearing a long charcoal coat that fell past her knees, and her dark hair, longer than I remembered, was pulled back in a messy bun. She moved with a confidence that hadn't been there before, the kind of ease that comes from 4 years of college, of becoming someone new. She reached back into the car and pulled out a large suitcase, her breath visible in the cold air as she looked up at the house. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something in her expression that made my chest tighten. Uncertainty. Vulnerability. It was gone in an instant, replaced by that familiar smirk when Mom opened the front door and rushed out to greet her. I stayed in the kitchen, hidden behind the counter, watching. Coward, a voice in my head whispered. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face her, to see those sharp eyes that had always seemed to see right through me, to feel that pull of something I couldn't name. By the time I forced myself to go into the living room, Mom had already settled Amber on the couch with hot chocolate, and they were deep in conversation about college and life and all the things that had happened in the years since we'd last really spoken. Amber looked up when I entered, and our eyes met across the room. For just a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something unspoken. Then her expression shifted into that familiar competitive edge, that slight lift of her chin that had always meant one thing: game on. "Well, well," she said, her voice smooth as honey and twice as dangerous. "Look who finally decided to join us." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Amber, didn't know you were coming." "Clearly," she replied, taking a slow sip of her hot chocolate, her eyes never leaving mine. "Your mom was kind enough to invite me. I'm looking forward to catching up. It's been what? 4 years? 4 years? 3 months? And 16 days. Not that I was counting." "Something like that," I said, moving to the armchair across from her. I sat down carefully, aware of every movement, every breath. "How's college been?" "Enlightening," she said, and there was something in the way she said it that made me wonder what she'd learned. "How about you? Still trying to prove something?" There it was. The first jab. The opening move in a game we'd been playing since we were 7 years old, and she'd beaten me in a spelling bee. I should have felt that familiar surge of competitive fire, that need to respond with something equally cutting. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Something that terrified me. "Still trying to be better than everyone else?" I countered, but my voice lacked its usual bite. She smiled then, and it was genuine. Not the competitive smile I knew so well, but something softer. Something that made my breath catch in my throat. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Or maybe I'm finally trying to be better than myself." Mom bustled between us, oblivious to the tension, chattering about the Christmas plans and the dinner preparations. But I couldn't look away from Amber. And I realized, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that this Christmas was going to change everything. The first real moment came on Christmas Eve afternoon, in the kitchen. I was preparing the desserts, a tradition I'd maintained since Mom had stopped doing it herself 5 years ago, when Amber wandered in, still in her pajamas, her hair down and falling in waves past her shoulders. I tried to ignore her. I really did. But it was impossible. "Need help?" she asked, leaning against the counter with a casualness that seemed designed to unsettle me. "I've got it," I said, focusing intently on the chocolate ganache I was whisking. "You can just relax. You're a guest. Come on," she said, moving closer. "Remember when we used to bake together, before everything got complicated?" I did remember. I remembered perfectly. We were 12, and my mom had asked Amber to help me make cookies for a school fundraiser. We'd laughed so hard we could barely breathe, and we'd made an absolute mess of the kitchen. Amber had gotten flour in her hair, and I'd thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. That was before the science fair, before Amber's project won first place, and mine came in third. Before I realized that I couldn't beat her at everything, and that realization had somehow become the foundation of our entire relationship. That was a long time ago, I said, my voice tight. Yeah, she said softly. It was. She was quiet for a moment, and I could feel her watching me. Then she moved around the counter and started gathering ingredients without asking. Butter, eggs, flour. She knew exactly what I needed, which somehow made it worse. We worked in silence for a while, and it wasn't the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other. It was loaded, heavy with all the things we weren't saying. But gradually, something shifted. Amber started humming, a song I recognized from high school, something we'd both loved, and I found myself humming along. Then she made a joke about how she'd somehow managed to burn water in her college dorm, and I laughed. Actually laughed. Not the bitter, competitive laugh I'd perfected over the years, but a real, genuine laugh. "You're still terrible at cooking," I said, shaking my head. "And you're still a perfectionist," she replied, bumping her shoulder against mine as she reached for the vanilla extract. Some things never change. But that wasn't true. Things had changed. She had changed. I could see it in the way she moved, more assured but also somehow more vulnerable, in the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, in the way her hands shook slightly when our fingers brushed as we both reached for the same measuring spoon. That evening, as my family gathered in the living room to watch Christmas movies, Amber and I found ourselves sitting on opposite ends of the couch, a careful distance between us. My younger sister, Emma, was curled up between us, and my parents were in the armchairs, already half asleep. The movie was some classic romantic comedy, the kind where everything works out perfectly in the end. I wasn't really paying attention. I was hyper-aware of Amber's presence, of the way she'd tucked her feet underneath her, of the soft sweater she was wearing that made her look impossibly comfortable and impossibly beautiful. Somewhere around the middle of the movie, Emma fell asleep and slumped against my shoulder. I adjusted to make her more comfortable, and when I looked up, I found Amber watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," she said, but she didn't look away. "You're good with her. With kids, I mean. I remember you talking about wanting to be a teacher back in high school." I was surprised that she remembered. "Yeah, well, I'm working on my degree now. Should have my credential in another year." "That's amazing," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. "You always were good at explaining things. Patient. Even when you were frustrated with me." "I was never frustrated with you," I said, then immediately regretted it. It was too honest, too revealing. She tilted her head, studying me. "Yes, you were. You were frustrated because I kept beating you, and you hated that." "I didn't hate you," I said quietly. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Amber's expression shifted, softened. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but then my dad shifted in his chair, and the moment broke. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself in the kitchen again, unable to sleep. I was making tea when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Amber appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, looking like she'd just woken up from a nightmare. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, filling a second mug. She shook her head and came to sit at the kitchen counter. "Too much in my head. College stress, family stuff, coming home. It all catches up with you eventually." I slid the tea across to her. "Want to talk about it?" She wrapped her hands around the mug, considering. "Do you ever feel like you've been so focused on one thing for so long that you don't know who you are without it?" My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" I mean, she said slowly, that I spent so much time trying to be the best, trying to beat everyone else, that I forgot to figure out who I actually wanted to be. And then I got to college, and suddenly there was no one to compete with, no one to prove myself to, and I realized I had no idea what I actually wanted. I understood exactly what she meant, because I'd spent 15 years defining myself in opposition to her, and now I didn't know who I was without that rivalry. So what did you do? I asked. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and there was something vulnerable and raw in her eyes. I started thinking about the things I actually cared about, the people I actually cared about, and I realized I'd been an idiot for a very long time. My breath caught. Amber, I'm going to bed, she said quickly, standing up. But before she left, she reached out and squeezed my hand. Just for a second. Just enough to make my entire world shift on its axis. After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen, my tea growing cold, and I finally admitted to myself what I'd been running from for 15 years. I was in love with Amber Mitchell. I had probably been in love with her since that day in the kitchen when she got flour in her hair, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Christmas morning arrived with a kind of magic that only happens once a year. The house was transformed into something out of a storybook. Garland draped along the staircase, lights twinkling in every window, the tree in the living room standing tall and proud, surrounded by carefully wrapped presents. The smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven mixed with pine and hot chocolate, creating an atmosphere that felt almost sacred in its perfection. I woke up early, as I always did on Christmas, and lay in bed for a moment, listening to the house wake up around me. I could hear my parents moving downstairs, could hear Emma's excited footsteps in the hallway. And then I heard Amber's door open, heard her soft footsteps as she made her way downstairs. I gave myself 5 minutes to compose myself, to put on the mask of normalcy that I'd perfected over the years. Then I got out of bed and headed downstairs. Amber was already in the kitchen with my mom, helping to arrange the cinnamon rolls on a platter. She was wearing a deep green sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and her hair fell in soft waves down her back. She looked up when I entered, and for just a moment, I saw something in her expression that made my heart stop. Recognition, understanding, maybe even hope. Then Emma came thundering down the stairs, and the moment was lost. We gathered in the living room, and the chaos of Christmas morning took over. Emma tore through her presents with the enthusiasm of a 14-year-old who still believed in the magic of the holiday. My parents sat together on the couch, holding hands like they were teenagers again, and Amber and I found ourselves sitting next to each other on the floor, passing presents back and forth, our hands occasionally brushing, our eyes meeting and quickly looking away. When it came time for the gifts we'd exchanged, a tradition in our family where we each bought something small for everyone, I felt my stomach twist with anxiety. Because I'd bought Amber a gift. I'd bought it months ago, before she'd even confirmed she was coming. It was a book, actually. A collection of essays about finding yourself and figuring out what you actually want from life. I'd seen it in a bookstore and thought of her immediately. Thought about the conversation we'd had in the kitchen about not knowing who you were without the competition. But now, with her sitting right next to me, I was terrified that it would be too revealing, too honest. "Your turn," Emma said, shoving a small wrapped box into my hands. "This one's from Amber." I froze. Amber had gotten me a gift. "Open it," Amber said, her voice carefully neutral, but I could see the slight tension in her jaw, the way her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. I unwrapped it slowly, my hands shaking slightly. Inside was a small framed photograph. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was from high school, from the day of the state championship soccer game. Amber and I were both in the photo, standing on opposite sides of the field, our eyes locked on each other across the distance. The photo had captured something raw and real between us, something that went far beyond rivalry. "I found it when I was going through old boxes before college," Amber said quietly. "I kept it all these years. I don't know why. But I thought maybe you should have it. To remember that we were more than just competitors." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the photograph, at the two people in it who were so clearly connected by something neither of them understood at the time. "Thank you," I finally managed, my voice rough with emotion. "Your turn," my mom said gently, handing me the gift I'd wrapped for Amber. I watched as she opened it, watched as she pulled out the book and read the title. Her eyes widened slightly, and when she looked at me, there was something like tears in her eyes. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Lucky guess," I said. But we both knew it was more than that. That afternoon, after the chaos of gift opening had settled and my family had dispersed to various corners of the house, my dad watching football, my mom napping, Emma on her phone, Amber found me in the study, where I'd retreated to escape the noise. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. My heart started racing. "About what?" "About this," she said, gesturing between us. "About whatever this is. Because I can't keep pretending that there's nothing here. I can't keep acting like the past 15 years didn't happen. Like I didn't spend half my life thinking about you, competing with you, trying to prove something to you." I stood up slowly. "Amber." "Let me finish," she said, holding up a hand. "I spent 4 years at college trying to figure out who I was without you. And you know what I realized? I was miserable because everything I did, everything I accomplished, it all felt empty without someone to share it with, without you to share it with." "You can't just say things like that," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't just come back here and turn my entire world upside down." "Why not?" she asked, stepping closer. "You've been turning my world upside down since we were 7 years old. Why should now be any different?" "Because now it's real," I said. "Before it was just competition. It was just a game. But if we do this, if we actually acknowledge what's between us, then it's real, and it can hurt us. And I don't know if I can handle that." "I know," she said softly. "I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what could have happened if I'd just been brave enough to tell you the truth." She reached out and took my hand, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like all the years of competition had been leading to this moment, this connection, this truth. "What's the truth?" I asked, even though I already knew. "The truth is that I love you," she said. "I have for a very long time, and I think maybe you love me too." I did. God help me. I did. And I couldn't hide it anymore. I pulled her closer, and for a moment, we just stood there, breathing the same air, feeling the weight of 15 years of unspoken feelings between us. Then I kissed her, and it felt like coming home. It felt like finally understanding what all the competition had been about. It felt like the beginning of something real. The days after that kiss were surreal. Sabrina, that's me, moved through the house like I was in a dream, hyper-aware of Amber's presence, stealing glances when I thought no one was looking, finding excuses to be in the same room. My family, bless them, seemed completely oblivious. Or maybe they were just being kind and pretending not to notice the way Amber and I had suddenly become inseparable. On the day after Christmas, we took a walk through the neighborhood, bundled up in heavy coats and scarves, our breath visible in the cold air. The streets were quiet, most people still in their homes, enjoying the aftermath of the holiday. We walked without a destination, just moving through the familiar streets of my childhood. And Amber told me about college. She told me about the friends she'd made, the classes she'd loved, the moments of loneliness that had caught her off guard. She told me about the night she'd cried in her dorm room because she'd gotten a perfect score on an exam and had no one to celebrate with. She told me about the day she'd realized that all the achievements in the world meant nothing if there was no one to share them with. "I kept thinking about you," she admitted as we walked past the park where we'd spent so much of our childhood. "I'd accomplished something, and my first instinct was always to find you and tell you about it. And then I'd remember that we weren't really friends anymore, that we were just rivals, and it would hurt all over again." "I did the same thing," I confessed. "I'd see something that reminded me of you, or I'd remember some stupid competition we'd had, and I'd think about calling you, and then I'd remember that you probably hated me, and I'd talk myself out of it." She stopped walking and turned to face me. "I never hated you, not for a single second. I was just scared." "Of what?" I asked. "Of this," she said, gesturing between us. "Of feeling this way about someone who was supposed to be my rival. Of wanting something that I wasn't sure I could have. Of losing you if I admitted how I felt." We stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, the cold seeping into our bones, and I realized that we'd both been running from the same thing. We'd both been so afraid of vulnerability that we'd hidden behind competition, behind the safety of a rivalry that kept us at a distance while keeping us connected. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, taking her hand. "I'm not going to leave you." "You don't know that," she said, but she was smiling. "People leave. People change. People realize they made a mistake." "Maybe," I admitted, "but I don't think I will. I think I've been waiting for this my entire life, and I'm not going to waste it by running away." That evening, we sat by the fireplace in the living room while my family played board games on the other side of the room. Amber and I were tucked into a corner of the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, my arm around her waist. It felt right in a way that nothing else ever had. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, so that only I could hear. "Something I haven't told anyone." I tilted my head so I could see her face. "What?" "I deferred my job offer," she said. "The one I got in California. I told them I needed another year to figure some things out." "Why?" I asked, surprised. "Because I realized that I didn't want to move across the country and spend the next year wondering what if," she said. "I didn't want to wake up 5 years from now and realize that I'd made all my decisions based on fear. So I'm staying here. At least for now. I'm going to figure out what I actually want. And I'm going to do it with you." I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "You're staying?" "I'm staying," she confirmed. "I got a job at a non-profit downtown, starting in January. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't pay as much as the California offer, but it's meaningful work. And more importantly, it means I get to be here. With you. If you want me to be." "Of course I want you to be," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've always wanted you to be here." She lifted her head and looked at me, and in the firelight, I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear and hope warring with each other. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I'm terrified that this won't work out, that we'll ruin the friendship we're trying to build, that I'll wake up one day and realize I made a huge mistake." "I'm terrified too," I said honestly. "But I'm more terrified of not trying, of spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been." She reached up and touched my face, her fingers gentle against my cheek. "Promise me something." "Anything," I said. "Promise me that if this gets hard, if we hit rough patches, you won't just run away. Promise me you'll fight for us." "I promise," I said. "And I need you to promise me the same thing." "I promise," she whispered. We kissed again, slower this time, more deliberate. It felt like a vow, like we were sealing something sacred between us. When we pulled apart, my mom was watching us from across the room with a knowing smile, and Emma was grinning like she'd won the lottery. "Finally!" Emma exclaimed, throwing her hands up in the air. "I've been waiting for you two to figure it out for literally years." My face flushed bright red. "How long have you known?" "Since high school," Emma said matter-of-factly. "It was obvious to everyone except you two. You were always looking at each other when you thought no one was paying attention. It was kind of pathetic, honestly." Amber laughed, a real genuine laugh that made my heart soar. "Your sister's right. We were pretty obvious." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Amber and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, looking up at the stars. The snow had stopped falling, and the night was clear and crisp, the kind of night that makes you feel like you're the only two people in the world. "What happens when the holidays are over?" Amber asked quietly. "When we have to go back to real life?" "We figure it out," I said. "Together. We take it one day at a time, and we don't let fear make our decisions for us." "That sounds simple," she said. "It's not going to be simple," I admitted. "But it's going to be worth it. You're worth it." She reached over and took my hand, and we sat like that for hours, talking about the future, about our dreams, about the life we might build together. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The last few days of Amber's stay passed in a blur of stolen moments and quiet conversations. We spent time with my family, but we also carved out space for just us. Long walks through the snowy neighborhood, late-night conversations in the kitchen, stolen kisses when we thought no one was looking. On New Year's Eve, we stood on the roof of my parents' house, bundled up in winter coats, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The ball was about to drop in Times Square, and we were counting down to a new year, a new beginning. "I've been thinking," Amber said as we watched the countdown on my phone, "about what happens next, about us." My heart started racing. And I think we should take it slow," she said. "I don't want to rush into anything. I want to really get to know you again, not as rivals, but as people, as potential partners." I nodded, even though every part of me wanted to rush forward, wanted to skip to the part where we were completely sure about each other. But she was right. We had a lot of history to unpack, a lot of walls to break down. "Slow is good," I said. "We can do slow." 10, my phone announced. 9, 8. "I love you," Amber said suddenly, the words tumbling out before the countdown finished. "I know we just started this, and I know we said we'd take it slow, but I need you to know that I love you. I have for a very long time." 7, 6, 5. "I love you too," I said, pulling her close. "I love you so much it terrifies me." 4, 3, 2. "Happy New Year," she whispered, as the ball dropped and the world exploded into celebration. 1. Happy New Year. We kissed as the clock struck midnight, and it felt like the whole world was celebrating with us, like the universe itself was blessing this new beginning we were creating together. The next morning, Amber had to leave. Her parents were coming to pick her up, and she needed to get back to the city to prepare for her new job. I helped her pack her suitcase, and we moved around each other carefully, aware that this was the first real test of what we'd started. When her parents arrived, I stood in the doorway and watched as she hugged my family goodbye. My mom held her for a long time, whispering something in her ear that made Amber smile through her tears. Emma gave her a fierce hug, and made her promise to visit soon. My dad shook her hand and told her he was glad she was staying in the city. Then it was just me and her, standing in the doorway of my childhood home, the place where everything had changed. "This isn't goodbye," she said, reading the fear in my eyes. "This is just the beginning. We're going to make this work. I know we are." "I know," I said, pulling her into my arms one last time. "I love you, Amber Mitchell." "I love you too," she said. "I always have. I was just too scared to admit it." I watched her drive away, her car disappearing around the corner, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of peaceful certainty. We had found each other again, not as rivals, but as two people who had finally figured out what they actually wanted. Over the next few months, we took it slow, just like we'd promised. We went on dates. We talked for hours on the phone. We learned each other again from the ground up. And slowly, carefully, we built something real. Something that went beyond the competition and the rivalry and all the walls we'd built over the years. By spring, I was spending most of my weekends at her apartment in the city. By summer, we were talking about moving in together. By fall, I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this woman who had been my rival, my nemesis, and now, my greatest love. It wasn't a fairy tale. We had arguments. We had moments of doubt. We had to work through the years of hurt and misunderstanding that had built up between us. But we did it together, and that made all the difference. 1 year after that Christmas, we were back at my parents' house for the holidays. Amber and I were in the kitchen, baking cookies just like we used to, flour in her hair and laughter filling the space between us. My family was in the living room, and the house smelled like cinnamon and pine and home. "Do you ever regret it?" Amber asked as she rolled out dough. "Choosing me over everything else?" "Never," I said without hesitation. "Do you?" "Not for a second," she said, looking up at me with those eyes that had captivated me since we were 7 years old. "I spent so many years running from this, from us. And now I can't imagine my life any other way." I kissed her, right there in the kitchen, with flour on both our hands and love in our hearts. And I realized that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone new. They're about finally seeing the person who's been there all along, waiting for you to be brave enough to love them back. The rivalry that had defined my childhood, Sabrina's childhood, had transformed into something beautiful, something real, something that would last a lifetime. And as I held Amber in my arms, I knew that I had finally found what I'd been searching for all along. Not victory, not triumph, but love. True, authentic, terrifying, wonderful love. Tapri Encerramento Final. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. I hope it reminded you that sometimes the people we think we hate are actually the ones we love the most. That the line between rivalry and love can be thinner than we ever imagined. And that it's never too late to be brave enough to tell someone how you really feel. If this story touched your heart, if you found yourself rooting for Sabrina and Amber, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Because there are so many more stories like this one waiting to be told. Stories of love, of second chances, of people finding their way back to each other. Stories that remind us what it means to be human, to be vulnerable, to be brave. Subscribe now, and never miss another story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.